Hello everybody, I'm Eric Pappenfoos. It's Friday, so it must be a buy day, and as promised, we're here at the Midtown Scholar to show you the Rare Book Room. We've talked a lot about the upcoming collectibles room, which is opening in the fall, but the Rare Book Room is very much open for business right now. And if you come on in, the first thing you're going to notice on the way to the Rare Book Room, and we're here at the Scholar Underground, is we've got a little exhibit about how the bookstore used to be an old Boston department store, and we contrast pictures of what it looked like back in the 1950s with what it looks like today. You have to make your way by the historical pictures in order to come into the Rare Book Room. And fun fact, we actually had to tunnel between our two buildings and took out just cubic foot after cubic foot of dirt and gravel to be able to make this passageway. We are now underneath the building on the corner rather than underneath the main bookstore. But the Rare Book Room is designed to have books from all over the world. They're arranged by geographic point of origin. So this is the British history bookcase with all sorts of British imprints. Similarly, we have a French imprint case and a European one. And throughout the Rare Book Room, even though the books are kept under lock and key, we do have a number of exhibits. So you can come and you can read about, for instance, Cambridge-style bindings or Samuel Johnson's English Dictionary. And it's designed so that you can browse it, and if you see something you'd like to see, we can unlock the case. One of the reasons we're doing the collectible room is because we don't want to have to always have books locked away, and we want you to be able to hold them and touch them. But these are some of the more valuable books, and at least we have glass windows and ways in which to look at them. So today we're going to talk about the literary debuts of two of the most famous authors in the 19th century. And we happen to have in our special collections here, and I'm going to open one of them cases for you, examples of first editions by Mark Twain and Jules Verne. So let's start a little bit with Mark Twain and Mark Twain's literary debut. And a few months back now, we purchased the inventory of a bookstore up in Lebanon, Pennsylvania, from a gentleman named Alan Angela, and he was downsizing. And inside his bookstore, he had a wonderful collection of runs of American periodicals, such as Harper's Magazine. Many of these volumes, there's hundreds of them, are going to be in the new collectibles room. They're all available for about $20 a piece, and they're really great time capsules of the literature of the 19th century in America. But some of them are more valuable, including this particular edition from 1866, because it contains the literary debut of Mark Twain. And let me just read you what Mark Twain wrote about his literary debut, because he wrote about that. He said, "In those very early days, I'd already published one little thing about a jumping frog in an Eastern paper, but I did not consider that counted. In my view, a person who published things in a mere newspaper could not properly claim to be recognized as a literary person. He must rise way above that. He must appear in a magazine. He would only be a literary person then, and also he'd become famous right away, and those two ambitions were strong upon me. And this was 1866, so I prepared my contribution, and then I looked around for the very best magazine to go up to glory in. And I selected the most important one in New York, and the contribution was accepted, and I signed it Mark Twain, for that name had some currency on the Pacific coast, and it was my idea to spread the name all over the world now and in this one jump. Now the article appeared in the December number, and then I waited a month for the January number, for that would be the one that would contain the list of contributors. And so this is the yearly volume with all of the monthlies put together. And here you can see the article that he waited up to see, 43 days in an open boat. But it doesn't have his name in it because he had to wait for the index in the last volume of the year to do that. And he got it. And if you continued reading his account, you'd see he looked for his name and he searched for his name, and oh dear, they misspelled it. Mark Swain. Well, it was a fresh named Eastern printers, and they put it as Mark Swain. At any rate, I was not celebrated, and I did not give a banquet. I was a literary person, but that was all, a buried one, buried alive. So the literary debut of Mark Twain, they didn't get his name right. And that's what makes this Harper's Monthly magazine pretty pretty collectible. Now, the literary debut of Jules Verne is a whole different story. Jules Verne was perhaps the most translated author in the 19th century, and definitely is the second most translated author in the world today. Fun trivia question, Amanda. You want to guess who the most translated author in the world is? Any idea?
I have no clue.
Okay, all right. Well, it could be like J.K. Rowling could be coming up, but it is Agatha Christie, believe it or not. But Jules Verne is the second most, and he published most of his books, obviously in French, and they were all part of a collection called The Extraordinary Voyages. And he had this amazing deal with a French printer. I'm going to show you the name of the French printer and how they were published right there. To basically put them together in one sort of continuing chronology of a few stories every year, teaching you about the world and science and adventure and all these great things. And he ended up writing over 54 books in the series, Extraordinary Adventures, including all the famous ones that we know, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, Around the World in 80 Days, Journey to the Center of the Earth. They were all part of the series, and the series was lavishly done, well illustrated in the French, and really brought him great fame in France. And so people collect them. They were first published in magazine form, just like Twain, and then compiled into these books. The problem came when they were to be translated into English and sent to the American market. And the American market basically determined that Jules Verne was a children's author, and that this science fiction stuff really needed to be dumbed down for a younger audience. So here's an example of an American edition of Around the World in 80 Days. Now, you remember some weeks back, we talked about Charles Dickens and his frustration with copyright and how Americans would just rush to take his books and put them in print. Well, the same thing happened with Jules Verne. Copyright hadn't improved. American publishers could do whatever they wanted. And not only did they market the books for children, but they translated them and they left out entire passages. And in some cases, they did certain things, like Nemo, the great explorer. He had some not so great things to say about the British Empire, gone in the English editions. Some of entire chapters of Jules Verne were erased. Certain characters, for instance, in American translations were made to be things like anti-Semitic when they weren't at all in Jules Verne's works. So it's only been recently that Jules Verne's works have undergone a new series of translations, and they've discovered all these discrepancies. So if you haven't read Jules Verne in a while, or you remember just these great editions from your youth, read them again as an adult, because he wanted his reputation to be that of a great literary author, and it should be, and it's been restored in some of the new translations today. We've got a great selection of Jules Verne here, both in French and English, in the Rare Book Room of the Midtown Scholar. Okay, well, we are going to end today on a funny book. Are you ready? It is Nigerian Dwarf Goat Care. And if you've been wondering certain questions about Nigerian dwarf goats, well, you can have your answers here. For instance, will my goats be okay if I feed them commercial pellets? Oh, no, they will not be. Can I let my goats graze in the yard or pastured? Well, you better be careful. How often can I breed my Nigerian dwarf goats? Well, apparently it's only about 25 times a year. Who knew that? All right. Well, this reminded me of a Mark Twain story, so I think we're going to end with that, because in Roughing It, he has a great story about an old guy, Mr. Jim Blaine, and here's the copy of it, who tells a story about a goat. Okay, it's a ram. It's not a Nigerian dwarf goat, but it's the same thing. But he can only tell the story when he gets really, really drunk. So he gets really, really drunk. He starts to tell the story. We hear about cannibals. We hear about adventures. We hear about all sorts of things. And then suddenly he falls asleep. And we never really find out about grandfather's great goat. So that's your story today. Next week, we'll be back with a whole new edition of Buy Day, and we're going to talk, rather than literary debuts, we're going to talk about literary reviews and some of the bad reviews that famous authors got. See you next week on Buy Day Friday.